Welcome to part 5 in this series of videos where we look at Blazor WebAssembly from a beginner's perspective. So far, we have displayed a list of countries from a SQLite database, but we don't currently have a way to add, edit or delete countries. We will be tackling these omissions in this video. These operations are normally called CRUD operations. And CRUD stands for Create, Read, Update and Delete. But unfortunately, we don't use these words universally across our programming languages. For example, in SQL, create is renamed insert, read is select, but update and delete remain the same. In C#, our HTTP commands are slightly different again. So create is HTTP post, read is HTTP get, update is HTTP put, and delete is HTTP delete. And to further add to confusion, I use add and edit for create and update. So, bearing that in mind, what are the jobs we need to do in our project to add, edit and delete records in our database? Well, the first thing we're going to do is to add a toolbar to the countries grid, to the Syncfusion grid in fact. Then we're going to add methods to add a country, edit a country and delete a country. The toolbar, as I say, is using a Syncfusion control, and we should have the finished item looking similar to this, where we've got a toolbar at the top of the Syncfusion grid with just add, edit and delete. So let's look at what we need to make these changes. With Visual Studio open, we go to the Pages folder in the Client project and open country list page.razor. And in here, within the Syncfusion grid definition, we want to add this to add a toolbar. So that simply says toolbar is a Syncfusion command, and we're giving it a name toolbar items, which so far hasn't been defined, hence the red squiggly. We also need to add some events so that when the user clicks the toolbar, something happens. And to do that, we add a Syncfusion grid events command. So it says grid events on toolbar click deal with this using a toolbar click handler, which we've yet to define, and we're using a value of country, i.e. the country object. Next, we need to provide a list of items for the toolbar, and we do this in code, and we define it. I'm going to put it at the top here, and it's a private list of type item model. We're calling it toolbar items to match this item up here, and it's a new list. But at this stage, we haven't provided any values for this list. We do that within the onInitializedAsync method, and we do that by adding this code. So we're adding 3 items to the toolbar: add, edit and delete. We're providing tooltip text, and we're providing icons for it. But we still haven't got the toolbar click handler. So we need a new method to deal with that, and I'll add it to the bottom here. So this is the toolbar click handler, and it's using the Syncfusion Blazor Navigation's click event. So the argument's being passed over to the text from the toolbar, which can either be add, edit or delete, and we'll be adding code in here for the adding, editing and deleting, but we haven't got anything there yet. So we better just check that this works. So we run the application. The application runs, and if we select country list, we'll see our Syncfusion Grid with our toolbar at the top. It doesn't do anything at the moment, and we need to tackle that next. So we'll be starting by adding a function to add a country and then later editing and deleting. So let's look at the code for doing that. We'll use a separate page to provide the add and edit functions. To use a separate page, the country list page must be amended with the following changes. We need to inject the navigation manager to enable navigation to a separate page. And we do that by entering this code at the top of the file, just saying inject navigation manager. Next, we need to declare a variable for the country ID so that we can be assigned a value of 0 to signify that this is a new country. Later on, we will be getting the actual value of a country ID where we want to edit it. But for this, we just need to declare it. And we'll put that under these other declarations. And I'm setting it to 0 because I don't want to have a null in there. The next thing we need to do is in the toolbar handler procedure, add the code to set the country ID to 0 and navigate to the new countries add edit page. So I'll paste the code in for that. And it's here. So here we've got the toolbar handler, and if the text on the tool is add, we'll set the country ID to 0 again, and then we'll navigate to our new page called countries add edit, which we're just about to create. And to do that, we open our pages folder, right click, select add and its eraser component, and I'm going to call it countries add edit. And I'm going to follow my normal convention by putting page at the end of it. Now, to spare you watching me type the code in for this, I'm just going to copy and paste, and then I'll explain. So the page that we're going to navigate to is countries add edit. Notice that I haven't got page on the end of this, and it's all lowercase, although the actual page has got is capitalized. We're injecting the country service because we'll be needing to add and edit countries in here, and we're injecting the navigation manager to allow us to navigate to other pages. Notice that the countries add edit here has appended to it the country ID. So when we're adding a new country, that'll be 0. When we come to edit a country, that'll be the country ID of the country we're editing. Then we've got a page title. That'll appear on the browser tab, and a heading, country, add a country. Then we're using a Syncfusion dialog box, which is this section here. And we're saying it's modal, so that'll mean it'll pop up and then disappear when we've closed it. And the user won't be able to click around in the background while this modal dialog is open. We're setting a width. We're not showing a close icon. That'll force the user to either cancel or save the record, and its visible is property is set to true. It's going to have a title saying add a country, and then a line feed or a blank line. Then we've got an edit form, which is this section here, and that consists of we're using a model of country, which will be defined further down in the code. And on valid submit, we're going to use the method called countries save. Again, we'll look at that a little bit further down. And it consists basically of just one text box, which I've placed in its own div. A Syncfusion text box. It's enabled. The placeholder is called country, so it'll have the word country above it. And the float label type is float label type always, so we'll always be able to see country. There are various other ways of dealing with this, such as having country in the text box to start with, but then that would disappear completely once the user started typing. And we're going to bind the value of whatever the user types in with the country.country name. Then at the end, we've got a couple of more blank lines and another div, which is a footer content. And within that, we've got a button container with two buttons, one that says save and a cancel one, which we've got an on-click event for, which says, and the event for that is, or rather the method for that is cancel. The save here is what happens. If that's a valid submit, it'll trigger the country save method. So that's the form, and the code, relatively straightforward. We declare a variable called country of type country, so that's kind of ID and the name of the country, and then we're going to be passing in a parameter which is the country ID, which will be 0. Then we've got the task, country save, which is this method. This method is kicked off here. It's an async task, and we await the country service.country insert, which we've yet to define, and we're passing to it the country object. And then once we're finished with that, we're going to navigate back to the countries list. If the user just clicks cancel, we just navigate straight back to the country list and lose any edits or data that the user has entered. So that's the countries add edit page, but we need to define this country insert. And that needs to be done in a number of different places. We've got to add the country service, we've got to add it to the country service, we need to amend the iCountry service, and we need to amend the country controller. So if we look in country service, so open the services folder and then the country service folder, and we select country service, and we're going to be adding a new method in here, and this is the code. So it says country insert, and we're passing to it a country object called country, and then we're going to await the post as JSON async, and then notice the API that we're going to, and then we're passing the country object to it. That's stage one. We also need to look at country service, and we need to add the task in there for that, which is simply this. So we're adding task country insert and country, and then lastly we need to deal with the country controller, and in here we need to add this code, which I think deserves a little bit of explanation. So you can see we're decorating it with HTTP post, i.e. create or insert. We're calling it country insert to match our service, and we're passing in a variable called country of type country. And we're now adding some dynamic parameters. Now, dynamic parameters are used in Dapper to allow you to pass in a variable number of parameters. In this case, we're only passing one, but it would allow us to pass others. And then we're adding to this parameters simply the country name, type country and country name, and it's a string. Then our SQL command is insert into country name, the field that we want to, the field where we've got the data, and the values, which is coming from this parameters, which is just at country name, which is coming from there. Then we use the IDB connection, as we did before, when we were getting countries. So that's the same as that line up there. And then we're just awaiting the execute async, the SQL command with the parameters we're passing to it. And we're just returning OK. We aren't getting any results back from this. Now we should be able to save it and run it. So that saved it. Let's give it a run. It runs anyway. So country list. There's our list, and we can now click add, and the new page comes up. Notice here it's got countries add edit and the 0 at the end there. So I can add a new country. Let's add Belgium. And click save. So we've added our new country. It appears in here, and it's got ID 3, which, if you remember from the database definitions, the country ID was auto-incrementing. As an aside, I will point out that this API/country, that does need the end slash on it. And in fact, although we didn't need it there, we do need it here. It's absolutely essential that that end slash is there. Right, so let's go back to our countries add edit page. And now we want to deal with editing. The first thing is we need to make a number of changes. The first of which is that the countries list page has got to be able to detect which record a user wants to edit. And they normally do this by clicking on a row in the grid. We'll then need to add code to the edit button in the toolbar to open the countries add edit page, passing to it the country ID of the row selected. We'll also need to let the user know that if they have failed to select a row before clicking the edit button. Luckily, Syncfusion provides a method of getting details of a row selected from the data grid. So actually we need to go back to the country list page because this is where the toolbar is, and this is where we'll be putting the code in for editing. But we need to add to the grid events this code. So I'll pop it in there. And the grid event is called row selected, and then we need to have a row select handler. We need a method to deal with that. So I'm going to put that at the end of the code. After the toolbar click handler, we'll have a row select handler, and the code for this is it's a public void row select handler, the name we entered up there, and it's going to be passing the arguments to it, and the arguments is going to be the country ID. So we're setting country ID, which we declared up here, to be the country ID of the selected country. Then in the edit section, we need this. If the country ID is greater than 0, we want to go to we want to navigate to countries add edit / and then the country ID. If it's a new country, the ID will be 0, or if the user hasn't selected one, it'll be 0. Otherwise, it'll be the country ID of the selected country, which must be greater than 0. Back to the countries add edit page. And when editing a country, in the country add edit page, we need to recognize that the country ID being passed to it is not 0, and we therefore need to populate the page with the name of the corresponding country. And we also have the page title and the H1 text set to add a country. This needs modifying to either add a country or edit a country, depending on whether the country ID is 0 or something other. We'll deal with the headings first. So I'm going to declare a new string variable at the top of the code section. And I'm just going to call it public string page title, and it's going to default to add a country. And then we're going to set the value of page title when the page opens, i.e. on initialization. And we're going to add this new method to deal with the on initialization. So we're going to put this after the declarations. So it's on initialized async. So we're going to say if country ID is equal to 0, we want the page title to be add a country. Otherwise, we want the page title to say edit a country. And now we want to replace add a country text with at page title in both the page title and the h1 tags. So up at the top where we have add a country, we want page title, and in here we want page title. We need to do two more things with this page. We need to populate the country name with the name of the country being edited, and we need to amend the save method to handle the update of the country name. To populate the country name, we add this code after the edit a country in the on initialized async. So this sets the country object to the country retrieved by the getCountryById service, where the country ID being passed to the method is the country ID of the row selected from the data grid. We will return to the getCountryById in country service shortly, which, when completed, will provide the name of the country to be edited. The other thing we need to do is update the country's save method to update the database with the revised name of the country. To do this, we'll replace the existing country save method with some other code. We're testing to see if the country ID is 0. If it is, we use the country insert service. If not, we use the yet to be defined country update service. If the latter, we pass the country ID to identify the country to be updated and the country object, i.e. basically the country name. In both cases, we navigate back to the countries list page, which will be initialized and therefore show any new or edited records. As with add a country, we need to tackle the country service, iCountry service and country controller. If we look at the country service, we need to deal with getCountryById. And I'll replace what we've got here, which at the moment throws a not implemented exception, with this. So we're passing in the ID of the country, and then we're setting a variable called result, which will get from JSON async the country, and we'll be passing to it API/country/ID, and we will return the result. And we also need to insert a new country update method. Which is going to follow a similar pattern. Country update, we're going to pass in the country ID and the country object, again basically the country name, and we're going to await this HTT put, i.e. update, and we're going to be passing to it we'll be going to the API country ID and then passing in the country object. We need to update the iCountry service. Now we've got a default one in there already. Let me just put in what we need. Let me get rid of that. Notice that country update we're passing in two parameters, the country ID and the country object. Now for the controller, there are two methods that need to be modified or added to the country controller. For getting a country by ID, we want to replace the existing code with this. So I'm giving it a different name. I'm calling it get by country ID. Again, we're passing in some dynamic parameters of the country ID. This time it's int32, and I'm saying select from country where country ID equals the parameter being passed in, the country ID. We're using an IDB connection as before, and we're setting a variable called country, and we're setting it to the result of our SQL command and then returning it. Notice that it is HTTP get and the country ID. And we also need, we haven't got it yet, no, we also need effectively a country update method, HTTP put, and then the country ID. And following a similar pattern, we've got two parameters this time. We've got the parameter for the country ID and the country name. And we're going to, the SQL is going to be update country, set the country name to the country name, where the country ID is the parameter for the country ID being passed in, and it just executes that asynchronously and then returns OK. Now, if I've done everything correctly, we should be able to, I'll save everything and then run it. So, country list. There's our list of countries. If I select one and click edit, I can now edit it and save it, and it's now got updated with Belgium's. If we come in and click edit and nothing happens, it's basically meaning that we haven't selected a row, and we need to warn the user about that. But maybe we'll come on to that a little bit later. We'll now look at deleting a country. We could simply add code to delete a record in the toolbar click handler, but it would be better practice to warn the user that a record is about to be deleted and ask for confirmation. We can do this by adding a dialog and then reacting to the user's response. Luckily, Syncfusion has recently introduced some predefined dialogues, and we can make use of those. It is likely that an application will have multiple places where a warning or confirmation dialog is needed, and so it makes sense to use Syncfusion's predefined dialogues. To install Syncfusion predefined dialog, we need to first of all check in the imports folder to make sure we've included Syncfusion Blazor pop-ups, which I did. Then in Program CS, we need to make a few changes. So find Program CS and open it. And at the top, we want to add using Syncfusion Blazor pop-ups. And we also need this at the end of the builder section. with a semicolon at the end. In the client shared directory or folder, we've got main layout.razor, and we need to make one change to that. So in shared main layout, we need to add this after this at body line, and I'll save everything. So with the Syncfusion predefined dialogues installed, we can use them to warn the user about not selecting a row if they're about to edit or delete one, and we can ask for confirmation before deleting a record. So the main place where we're going to use this is on the country list page. So if we open that again, we need to make these changes. At the top of the file, we've got to have some using statements. Or rather, we need one using statement to say using Syncfusion Blazor pop-ups, and we also need to inject the SF dialog service. What I'm going to do next is declare a new variable called country name, and I'm going to set it to an empty string. I'll be using this to present the user with the name of the selected country before deleting it. So it'll go along the lines of, do you really want to delete France, for example? So I'm going to add the variable in here called country name, and I'm setting it to an empty string. Now, I'm jumping ahead a bit here, but what I found was that after I deleted a country, it remained there. So I needed to go through this section again to get the countries, i.e. get the revised or updated list of countries, and then display it in the grid. But rather than having this appear once here and after the delete, I've decided to create a new method which just incorporates that, and I'm going to call it from two different places. So this is the new method, which, as you can see, just has the same code as we've got up here. But I'm now going to replace what we've got here by calling the refresh method. I'm now going to replace the code we've got in here for edit, and I'll explain what I'm doing. So what we're doing here is if the text item of the toolbar says edit, we're going to say if the country ID is 0, which it will be if they haven't selected a row, we're going to await the dialog service, and it's going to say please select a country. No country's been selected. If the ID is not 0, it's then going to navigate to the countries add edit with the ID of the country, and then reset the country ID back to 0 again. So that's for the edit. Now for the delete section, again, the first thing we're going to check is that a country has been selected. And if not, we're going to display a warning saying no country's been selected. If a country has been selected, a string variable called dialog message is declared and set to some text for asking for confirmation that the user wants to delete the selected country. And the country name is set on the row select handler. So if we copy this section, or rather paste this section for delete, we'll see that first of all, we're checking that the country isn't 0, and then we're saying please select a country, and then we're going to delete it. So the code for deleting is we've declared a string called dialog message, and we're going to say, are you sure you want to delete the country name? We're setting a boolean, is confirm, and we're going to wait to see whether that dialog, whether the user confirms whether they want to delete or not. If it's true, we'll await the country service delete, and then we'll call the refresh countries grid after it's been deleted and reset the country ID to 0. So we've still got to deal with country delete. So we do that in the country service. Where we want to insert a new method. So we're calling it country delete, and we're passing into it the country ID, and we're awaiting the HTTP delete function, and we're going to the endpoint API country and then the country ID. Therefore, we also need to update iCountry service. And this follows a familiar pattern of just declaring the country delete with the integer of country ID. The main work, of course, is carried out in the country controller, where again we need a new method to delete a country, and I'll paste in the code for that. So we're using HTTP delete, and we're passing in the country ID. We're calling it country delete. Parameters are just the country ID, and the SQL is delete from country, where country ID equals the parameter being passed in. Then we're opening the connection IDB as before, or declaring it, and then we're awaiting the con.execute async, and then the SQL command and the parameters. Now that should be it. So let's save it and test the system. If we go to country list, we say our list of countries. I'll try adding one again. And I'll now try editing it, but without selecting it. So if I choose edit, I get the warning, no country selected, please select a country. If I select one, I can then go and edit it. As I've noticed before, that should say edit a country rather than add a country, and we'll just deal with that at the end of this. So cancel. If we select delete a country, we can delete, and it says, are we sure? I'm going to say cancel, and it's not deleted. I'll select it again and then click delete. Are we sure we want to delete it? OK. Done. So that just leaves that annoying title here. So let's just deal with that. So if I close everything, that is going to be on the countries list page, and it'll be, no it won't, it'll be on the countries add edit page, and it's that we need to replace with page title. So I'll copy that, paste it down there, and I'll just quickly run this to check that's working. So I'll choose to edit France, and it now says edit a country. That's much better. That's it for this video. I'll put some links in the description to the script and code for this video. What I would say is that to learn C# and Blazor, it's much better if you actually type in the code rather than simply copy and pasting. I have found that much the best way to learn. Once you've got the idea, then copying and pasting is actually what most programmers do, so no shame in doing that. But to actually learn and see the connections between the various bits of the code, so for example between the the service, the iService and the controller, and how it's presented in the C# methods, do type out the code. Well, that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and the next video should be coming along fairly soon. Thank you.